Hello, Kathy Salisbury, the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University, returning to you once again with a virtual garden tour. So in actuality, this garden is real. It's not virtual, but it's not the Ambler Arboretum because we're still closed. We're still practicing social distancing to help preserve and protect the health and safety of our community. And so I am doing another garden tour from my backyard and of plants that you might see when you're traveling around trying to find nature and exploring, as you also maintain social distance. But when you return and can explore the Ambler Arboretum again, these are plants that you may find there in bloom. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about them. And today I'm going to focus on pollinators. I've been getting a lot of questions recently about attracting pollinators to the garden as more and more people venture outside and think more about their landscapes and even take on some landscaping projects. A lot of people want to attract pollinators to their landscapes. And so I thought I'd talk about how to get them there. And I'm starting today with this flower. Probably you've already guessed who this is. This is a pawpaw flower. And pawpaws are native trees to the Delaware River Valley, and they're perfectly hardy around us where we live. And they do create the largest edible native fruit in North America. And the fruit is about the size of a mango, and the flavor, people say, is like a cross between a mango and a banana, kind of custardy in texture. And people just love it. But the question is, how does the fruit happen? And that's, of course, through pollination. And you can see this unique flower here on the pawpaw. I'm holding it upside down. These flowers hang upside down. And what you can notice about them is there's kind of 3 petals here, and the reproductive structures are in the center, and it is red in color. And so the pawpaw is an important lesson in pollination because a lot of people, when they're thinking about pollinators, they might think about bees, honeybees especially, and butterflies and animals like that, insects like that. But maybe you don't think of beetles and flies and those types of insects that are also pollinators in the garden. And so when you're thinking about pollinators, really important thing to think about is diversity. So you don't want just to attract certain types of butterflies or certain types of bees into your landscape. If you want pollinators, you want to attract as many as possible because pollinators are specialized and different insects are going to pollinate different plants and pollinate different plants more effectively than other insects. And so if you want the plants to reproduce, to go to seed, or your flowers in your vegetable gardens to create vegetables, a variety of pollinators is really important. And so I'm talking about pawpaws because pawpaws actually are pollinated by flesh flies and blowflies and insects that people wouldn't necessarily consider when they're planting a pollinator garden. And this attracts flies because it smells kind of fetid. So if you were to sniff, you'd probably be glad that this is not scratch and sniff video right now because it kind of smells like rotting meat. And the color of this, as is the case of many maroon colored flowers, is supposed to trick the flies into thinking that it's some sort of carrion, some sort of meat that's rotting that the flies would want to go to. And while they're in there exploring, they naturally pick up some pollen and spread it to the next plant. And so when we're thinking about pollinators, it's really important to think not just, I'm going to let this one go, not just about, here's some of the leaves of the pawpaw, not just about the insects, the butterflies and the pretty things and the honeybees where we get honey from, but all types of pollinators. The other interesting thing as it relates to pollinators about pawpaws are that they are the host plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly and the pawpaw sphinx moth. And these 2 species, which are also pollinators in and of themselves, they visit flowers to pollinate, not pawpaw flowers, but the larvae, the caterpillars, need pawpaw leaves in order to thrive, in order to exist. So without pawpaws, we don't have the pawpaw sphinx moth, and we don't have zebra swallowtail butterflies. So in two ways, this plant supports pollinators, and that's another really important message when we're talking about planting for pollinators. One is that we need a diversity of plants to attract a diversity of pollinators. And the second is that we need to support all life cycles of pollinators. So not just the adults who are flying flower to flower looking for nectar, but also the caterpillars that will feed on the leaves that will eventually become adult pollinators visiting flowers. So there's two ways to think about a pollinator garden. So we're going to head over now to another plant, and we're going to scope this one out. So here we have Amsonia in this overgrown sort of meadow area I'm working with. So this is called Blue Star or Amsonia, and believe it or not, we also can think of birds when it comes to pollination, and the ruby-throated hummingbird is a pollinator. And the ruby-throated hummingbird is a bird that likes to visit this Amsonia, the blue star. And what's interesting about these, so notice the long tube at the back of the flower here. That's how you know that long-tongued animals are going to use this plant to gather nectar. And so hummingbirds are an example of that, but also, did you know that bees, our native bees, have different tongue lengths? So there's long-tongued bees and short-tongued bees. And so here, long-tongued bees are going to be who is visiting this particular flower. And so they're equipped just for that. This is why you need a diversity of flower structures. So different flower shapes in your garden will make sure you attract all different kinds of pollinators. And I don't know if you can hear it in my yard. Can you hear the bird song? So the birds really like if you have a diversity of pollinators too, because when they're raising their young like they are right now in my yard, they capture caterpillars and different types of larvae to feed their young. And so the more plants you have, the more pollinators you have, the more you're supporting a diverse habitat from the insects to the birds and other wildlife. So this Amsonia, the other interesting thing about it is it doesn't want anything to come in and steal its nectar. So let's see if we can get a close-up in here. And so it actually, in the tube of its flowers, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that close. In the tube of its flowers, it has backwards pointing hairs. So hairs that kind of point in towards the inside of the flower. And those are designed to keep nectar robbers out. And so any ants or smaller insects that might crawl inside and steal the nectar from the flower, these hairs are like a gate to keep those out. So they really only want the tongues of the long-tongued insects and the hummingbirds to take the nectar from this flower. All right, so that's Amsonia, blue star. So we're going to head over and take a look at another plant. Here. And here in this little garden next to the bird bath, I have some violets that I grow. I transplant them from other places and grow them here. And so here we have the violet. And what you'll notice about the violet is that it has these petals that are up and down. And so the petals, the lower petals, actually act like landing pads on the flower. Now, not a ton of insects visit violets for their nectar. It's not used a lot, but the who do use it can be mason bees, skippers, some flies do visit on occasion. In fact, so few insects visit violets for their flowers, their nectar, and their pollen, that violets actually create a petalless flower underneath their leaves. They're not showy, and these flowers can produce seeds without having pollination happen. And then they just expel their seeds around. So you won't often see insects visiting violets for their flowers. However, when we're talking about pollinators, we think of butterflies that visit flower to flower. And the leaves of violets are really important for fritillary butterflies. They're the host plant of fritillary butterflies. So having violets in your yard and letting them live there provide sorry about that, provide food source for fritillary butterflies. So without having them, you mightn't have these butterflies either, which of course are pollinators. So again, we're thinking about foliage and flower shape for our pollinators in our pollinator garden. The next one I want to show you is called Zuzia. This is also known as Golden Alexander. And Zuzia is in a family of flowers known as the carrot family. And this flower structure is called an umbel, like an umbrella. The spokes come out and it's kind of rounded. And these umbelliferous flowers are really fantastic for attracting pollinators and also beneficial insects. So not only pollinators, but those insects that will eat problematic insects in your yard as biological controls. These types of plants in the carrot family, which also includes fennel, dill, yarrow, these flower structures that have a lot of little flowers clustered all together are really great for attracting pollinators and beneficial insects. And so if you got a really close up on these flowers, which we've already established I'm not very good at doing, you'll see that they have 5 petals. There's not a scent to these flowers, but the flower display does last about a month. It's pretty long lasting. And many kinds of insects are attracted to this flower for pollen and nectar. They include short-tongued bees. So you don't need a long tongue to get to the nectar and the pollen in these tiny little flowers. So short-tongued bees will visit, as well as, an example of a short-tongued bee would be a green metallic bee. Maybe you've seen them. They're shiny. They're beautiful, bright green. Wasps, and wasps can be beneficial wasps too. So these wasps won't sting you, but they will sting harmful insects in the garden and lay their eggs in there, and they're predatory wasps. Flies and beetles, small butterflies, and long-tongued bees will visit this type of plant. Additionally, the black swallowtail butterfly is this is a larval host for the black swallowtail butterfly. Lots of plants in the carrot family are a larval host for the black swallowtail butterfly, and this includes Zuzia. So if you have an option to plant a non-native or a native, you can always go with the native option. All right. And so we'll move on to this stunning beauty of a flower here, which is not native. Let's see if we can see it. The sun. Let's see if we can find another one. Here we go. So here we have Clematis, and this also is not native. It's a climbing vine. So when you're thinking of pollinators, you want to think of heights too. You can have vines that climb up and will give higher flying insects opportunity for nectar and pollen. And then you can think ground covers that flower as well, which will reach some of the lower flying insects and crawling insects. So here we have just a non-native large flowered clematis that bees and even hummingbirds will visit these clematis for nectar. You can see it's getting covered with flowers. Now a really interesting one to me, this one's just starting to open up in my yard. This is Baptisia australis. This is blue false indigo, or wild blue indigo, sometimes it's called. And you can see these flowers are kind of like, if you have grown peas or beans in your garden, they kind of resemble the pea or bean flowers that you would find in your vegetable garden. And that's because they're all related. This is a cousin. It's in the bean family. And just to speak to different shapes of flowers. So we had those wide open flowers. We have the long tubular flowers. And here we have a flower that actually protects its reproductive parts where the nectar and the pollen is with 2 petals. And so what the pollinators that visit this need to do is be very strong, because actually they have to pry open the petals in order to get to the nectar and the pollen. And the insects, let's see if I can, the insects that are really good at that are, I can't do it. So the insects that are really good at that are very strong insects, and they just happen to be the queen bumblebees. So the queen bumblebees are who you usually see pollinating this flower because they can pry open those petals and get to the nectar and the pollen inside. So here we'll see if I can show you this here. So here you see they're protected, they were covered, and inside here is the nectar and the pollen. And so some strong insect needs to get in there to get to those. And generally who you see are the queen bumblebees doing that. And so, so there's a lot of nectar and pollen for those bees because not a lot of other insects can access the flowers. So just another reason to plant a diversity of plants for a diversity of insects here. And so the next one we're going to visit is this daisy-like flower. So this is called Origeron or fleabane, and it kind of looks like a daisy, but it has a landing pad here. And this flat open flower is great for a wide variety of insects too. You will see wasps, small butterflies, and even beetles visiting this plant for its nectar and pollen. And this can be annual or biennial. In your garden, it will seed in. It is native. And also, moth caterpillars feed on the foliage of fleabane. And remember, moths are pollinators also. So they visit night blooming flowers and are pollinating them at the same time. So we're not just thinking about a daytime flyers that we see. We also think of our nighttime flyers. And then even moths like the hummingbird moth, which kind of looks to me like a flying lobster. If you see those are moths. They're just daytime moths. So not all moths are nocturnal, but moths can be pollinators too. So we're not just thinking about bees and butterflies. We're also thinking about moths and birds and flies and beetles to attract in our pollinator garden. And let's see, we're going to go look at another plant kind of lower down on the ground. Just another shape of flower to consider. And this one's a ground cover level. And what I like about this one, the deer don't eat it. And so we can have its beauty around a while, even if we are dealing with deer. So this is chrysogonum. This is called green and gold. It is a ground cover. And it's flowering at a low height here. So you want to include a variety of heights in your landscape. So this will attract bees and flies, bright yellow color, flowers for about a month-long display. And yeah, you'll get bees and flies to it. All right. And then the last flower I wanted to show you today in the garden is, we're going to pass some more Zuzia. And here's a Dicentra exemia, the fern leaf bleeding heart, which also is enjoyed by hummingbirds and has a different flower shape. But the last flower I'm going to introduce you to today is our native Columbine. So this is Aquilegia canadensis, and it has dangling flowers. So if you are familiar with a hummingbird feeder, if have put a hummingbird feeder up, they're generally red and yellow, and they kind of dangle off of a hook, and the hummingbirds come and visit them. And so this is it's a great hummingbird plant, but also long-tongued bumblebees visit it. These kind of tall spikes that you see at the top of the flower, those are nectar reserves, or called nectar spurs. And so the tongues of long-tongued bees and hummingbirds can go up into those and get the nectar out of this flower, where other insects aren't able to do that. But you can see here the reproductive parts are showing, and so they are able to gather pollen. The insects are able to gather pollen and move from flower to flower. But if they're looking for the nectar, they need to have access through those long tongues. So short-tongued bees collect the pollen, and long-tongued bees and hummingbirds go up into those nectar spurs and gather the nectar. They're not really scented, but they do attract a lot of pollinators. So you can see the wide variety of shapes and colors and scents of flowers and the variety of heights that they're located. And having all of this leads to a high diversity of pollinators in your garden, which will lead to a diversity of other animals in your garden as well. And so as you're walking through nature and exploring the gardens that are open and even roaming around your backyard, take a look and see how many different shapes of flowers you can find, how many different colors you can find, how many different smells you can find, and how many different insects you can find roaming around your garden using those flowers. And someday, soon, hopefully, we will be able to meet you in the Arboretum and take that walk with you and go on a pollinator hunt together. Until then, we hope you remain safe, and thank you for joining us on these virtual tours. And I'm Kathy Salisbury, the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University, and we'll see you soon. Take care.